this video, we will continue from where we left off. Today, we will examine the remaining basic transform properties:
anchor point, rotation, scale, and opacity. By the end, we'll have something like this.
Let's get started.
The first property we will work with is the anchor point. The anchor point in Adobe After Effects is a central control point for each layer where transformations such as scale, rotation, and position are applied. It functions as the origin or pivot point for all transformations. Let's open the basic anchor point comp by double-clicking it on the project panel. Remember that you access a layer transform property by clicking on the drill down option on the timeline panel. The anchor point is at the top of the transform properties. The origin of compositions is at 0, 0, starting from the top left corner. This is important to remember because all origin positions of our layers are based on their distance from the composition's origin point. Changing a layer position to 0, 0 moves it to the top left corner, which is the composition origin. Utilize the align panel to center a layer within the composition. The anchor point's values are also based on the distance from the comp's origin point, represented as a crosshair in your layer. You can change this by going to the pan behind button on your toolbar or by hitting Y on the keyboard. Then click and drag to the position where you like to have the pivot of your layer. And you get the snapping by holding down Ctrl plus Shift while dragging the anchor point. As you can see, the position of the anchor point will dictate where transformation occurs in our layer. This is important to keep in mind as you can use this to your advantage when animating. For example, if you scale your object up and down, you'll notice it will scale from the center where the anchor point is located. Moving the anchor point to the middle bottom part of your layer will affect how the scale property changes the object. Now let's return to our main composition and examine how changing the anchor point affects our current animation. So, select your layer and using the pan behind tool, set your anchor point at the middle bottom of your shape. This will ensure that the scale looks correct when we animate it. Remember that by moving the anchor point, we're also affecting the position of the layer. So we need to adjust the previous animation so it looks correct. You can do this by selecting all the position keyframes in the timeline and clicking and dragging the motion path in the composition to make the lower keyframes touch the ground layer. As you can see, after this modification, we have the anchor point where it is needed and the animation looks the same. Let's explore the next property. The scale property will help us enhance the illusion of gravity affecting our shapes. We will be applying one of the 12 principles of animation known as squash and stretch. So open the scale composition and let's see how it works. Having the anchor point at the bottom allows us to unlink the width and height of our shape, giving us a more precise control over the scale of the shape in this example. Now let's turn the workspace area in the timeline to the 2-second mark. Let's add 3 keyframes in the position property to make the shape go up and down. Copy and paste the keyframes so we have the 3 at the same position. Then, on the middle one, move the shape up. So we get this basic bouncing motion. Select the middle one and add easy ease by hitting F9 on your keyboard. To really sell the squash and stretch animation, we need to separate the width and height so we can scale separately in each direction. We do this by clicking the link icon next to the scale property in the timeline panel. Add a keyframe on the width at the start of the timeline and increase the number by dragging on the value box of the scale property. Decrease the height of the shape in the same way, so it looks as if there's some force pushing it to the ground. Move to the next keyframe and set the width and height to 100%. Now copy the first keyframe and paste it at the end of the timeline. Hit spacebar to preview your animation, and now our shape is squashing when it touches the ground. To make the shape stretch when it's on the air, we will do the opposite, making it appear stretched just before it reaches the top position. Let me just tweak a little bit the values. Then copy and paste in the middle of the last keyframes. Select all the keyframes and apply Easy Ease by hitting F9 on your keyboard. And there you go. Now we have a pretty basic squash and stretch on our shape. Let's quickly save our progress by hitting Ctrl S on our keyboard. Now let's open our main composition and apply what we just learned. Move the playhead to the start of the workspace. Turn down the layer properties in the timeline. Add keyframes to the scale property in each part of the timeline where the shape hits the ground. Scale the shape as we did in the previous example. Remember that the more we scale our shape, the more exaggerated the animation will look like. As you can see, the shape is starting to stretch before it hits the ground, and we don't want that. The shape must only squash once it encounters an opposite force, in this case our ground. To resolve this, we need to add or duplicate the first keyframe at a 100% value in the scale property, just a few frames before the shape touches the ground. Copy and paste that keyframe just a few frames after the ball hits the ground. Delete that first keyframe, we don't really need it. Copy and paste those keyframes in the rest of the down positions in the timeline. As I'm just adjusting the scale keyframes position across the timeline and doing nothing new here, I'll just speed up this part. And there we go. Our shape now stretches when it touches the ground. Let's move on to the next property. The rotation property in Adobe After Effects controls how much a layer rotates around its anchor point. It's measured in degrees, where positive values rotate clockwise and negative values rotate counterclockwise. Let's open the rotation composition and start with a basic example. Click on your shape layer to twirl down the transform properties. Click on the stopwatch on the rotation property to set a keyframe at the beginning of your timeline. You can rotate your layer by dragging on the number in the rotation value box. If you drag the mouse to the right, you will rotate clockwise, and move it to the left to do the opposite. Move the playhead to the end of the timeline and set the value to 360. This will set a keyframe and make our shape do a full rotation between those keyframes. Drag your shape so it touches the ground, and let's set up some keyframes on the X position of our shape so we can see it moving and rotating. And now the shape rolls across the screen. Remember that if you feel that the rotation is too slow, we can always alter the value of the last keyframe. In this case, I'm going to set the number 2 so it rotates 2 times before reaching its final position. Now let's change the position of the shape in the first keyframe all the way to the left, and let's move it to the right on the final keyframe. Now our shape will roll from one side to the other. Let's close this composition and apply this knowledge while it's fresh. The rotation pivots around the layer's anchor point. As you may recall, we adjusted the anchor point for the shape to be positioned at the middle bottom. However, we need the shape to rotate around its center. There are several ways to achieve this, and I'll provide an additional tip to help it work. This will be explained further in future tutorials. If we modify the rotation property of our layer, it won't work as expected because we changed the anchor point to the base of the layer. As a result, when we play the animation, the shape will appear below the ground, which is not our intention. Each shape can contain different paths and fields, which are detailed in the component section of the shape layer. Each component of a shape layer, such as path points, stroke width, or fill color, can be animated over time. This makes it a powerful tool for motion graphics, since each component has its own set of transform properties. We can use this feature to create a group that represents our character's face. We select each shape of the face by holding Shift while selecting on the timeline. Then right-click and select Group Shapes from the context menu. Hit the spacebar to give the group a name. We'll call it Face. This will allow us to keep the anchor point of the layer at the bottom while rotating the face around its center. Twirl down the transform properties of the face group and set a keyframe for the rotation property at the beginning of our timeline. Then move the playhead to the end of the timeline and we'll set a keyframe right on the last time that the shape layer hits the ground. Now put the number 1 on the rotation property so our shape layer will do a full rotation while it's bouncing across the screen. Let's hit the spacebar to do a ramp preview. We can fix it by adding one rotation keyframe at the end of our timeline, and then change the value of the rotation property so the shape keeps rotating even after it touches the ground. I added too much rotation at the last keyframe, so I'll decrease the value so it doesn't appear to be rotating too much at the end. I'm just tweaking the rotation value so it appears to be slowing down at the end. So we're almost at the end. Our ball is moving, scaling and rotating. There's only one property left to cover in this tutorial, so let's check out the opacity property. The opacity property in Adobe After Effects controls the transparency of a layer. It's measured in percentages, where 100% is fully opaque or solid and 0% is fully transparent or invisible. Let's open the opacity composition to see a quick example. Pure down the transform properties of the layer and add a keyframe to the opacity property on the first frame of the layer. Move a few frames forward and reduce the opacity value. We want the shape to be fully visible in the middle of the animation. Let's move the first keyframe closer to the last one. Then move to the start of the timeline and reduce the opacity to a 0%. Let's shorten the work area by hitting N in our keyboard at the 2-second mark. Adjust the first keyframe so it sits at the 1-second mark. Hit the spacebar to preview our animation. As you can see, our object seems to be appearing and disappearing. Let's add an easy ease to the middle keyframes so we get a smoother animation. We don't need any transparency in the main animation, but let's add it, just to see how it works. Open up the main composition and add a transparency keyframe at the beginning of the timeline. Move a few frames ahead and add another keyframe. Set the value of the first keyframe to 0% opacity. Now, our bouncing shape fades in at the start of the animation. Let's do the opposite on the end of the animation to make our shape disappear as it reaches the end of the timeline. By following these steps, you have created an After Effects animation using the basic transform properties: anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. With practice on these properties, you will soon start mastering animation in After Effects, as they form the foundation for nearly all animations. Congratulations! Now that the animation is complete, it's only fair we give our little ball shape a few frames to bounce with. We do this by duplicating the layer and adding a little offset by dragging the layers on the timeline. In this way, we can see one shape bouncing right after the other. I'll just keep adjusting the spacing between the shapes and adjusting the animation. Please remember that you can download the files from this tutorial from my Gumroad page. The link will be available down in the description. That shape looks happier to me, now that he has some friends to bounce with. And this is how the final animation looks like.
I hope you find this tutorial helpful, and I can't wait to see what you create. If you need a refresher on the position property, be sure to check out this video. I'm working on several month tutorials that include various software and animation techniques to help you level up and start your animation journey. Remember to give it a like and subscribe, as this will help the tutorials reach a wider audience. Please leave a comment if you have any questions or suggestions on what you would like to see covered next. This is Dave, and as always, thank you, and let's make those pixels dance. See ya!